And sir, do the first, by the way, how many exposures did you get out of that first roll?
There would be 36, 35, 36.
Okay, and so sometimes when you're shooting a roll of 36, you only get 35?
It depends on how the camera on its first advances, or depending on how far I have pushed the film into its position.
Okay,
So I may run out at 36, and sometimes you might even get 37.
in this particular roll, do you notice that the last shot on the roll is item number 35? Not item number, but photograph number 35?
Yeah, I think it's, let me just check with this one.
Certainly.
You may.
Wait a second. Okay.
Yeah, it's either the next roll or the last negative. I may have reloaded walking around to the front of the building.
So, sir, to the best of your recollection, with this contact sheet, except for the fact that the actual negatives are slightly larger when they're printed there than they would be in a routine contact sheet, do they represent the first roll of film that you shot that night at Bundy?
Yes, sir.
And the first 33 frames on that roll, those would be those overall shots you talked about that you took between approximately 3:25 and say 3:55 in the morning.
Whatever the time was, yes.
Okay, and the last two shots that appear on there, those would be the two shots that you took sometimes between 4:20 and 4:35 in the morning. Is that correct?
Sustained. First question.
Sir, didn't you say just before the break that the time that the photographs were taken of Detective Ferman pointing at the glove, given the times that you gave for the other events that evening, would be somewhere between 4:20 and 4:35 in the morning? Didn't you say that, sir?
Although.
I probably did. I have practically no recollection as to the actual times involved.
Sir, yesterday when you were interviewed by me, were you interviewed by me for approximately an hour and a half?
That is correct.
And would it be fair to say that the majority of that time you were giving a narrative of what happened, the order it happened, and the times it happened on June 13th of 1994. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
May I publish it to the jury, Your Honor?
Yes.
What,
Actually, why don't you ask him one more? Do you want to ask him a question about the frame numbers?
that appears in each picture? Okay. Aside from the number in the lower right-hand corner of the actual print, is there also a number beneath the print which indicates which frame it was or which shot it was in the roll?
There's only one imprint on the negative. There are no other numbers.
Well, no. Are there numbers beneath each print there which tells you that this was, say, the third frame or the fourth frame or the sixth frame?
You mean the ones that are put on by Kodak?
Yes, the ones that are
Okay.
put on by Kodak.
Okay.
Okay. And do those also appear on that sheet?
That is correct.
All right, Mr. I'm sorry.
I was like, before I photograph it, I would like to use the Uelmen, and I think we have to cut the feed.
All right.
Just a couple of questions first. Sir, in those establishment location overall shots, whatever you want to call it, those first 33 shots, in those 33 shots you used a flash?
I use the flash on every photograph I take.
Okay. And and in addition to the flash, there were street lights that to some extent, or other artificial lights that were there that illuminated the scene as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you can see the illumination given off by those other lights in these various prints, can you not?
That is correct.
All right. And when you shot the two photographs of Detective Ferman pointing at the glove, and for those two shots, you shot those with a flash, did you not?
That is correct.
I'm now going to show you what is frame 34 and 35 on your first roll of film. So first of all, let me show you one at a time. You see those two?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And by the way, all the other photographs on that first roll, 1 through 33, those were all shot at nighttime, isn't that correct?
They were shot what?
At nighttime.
Yes, sir.
And as to 34, the 34th picture, do you see that on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Is that Detective Ferman pointing at the glove?
That is Detective Ferman.
And in 35, is that also Detective Ferman pointing at the glove?
That is also Detective
And
Ferman.
those were the last two pictures you took on that first roll of film during the night at Bundy on June 13th, in the early morning hours of June 13th, 1994?
That is correct.
Take the testimony
Overruled.
at night.
That's what he's...
Overruled.
Well, at this time, I have no further questions. I'd like to publish this, I'd like to pass it to the jury.
You
They
may.
need to look at it.
Add it to juror number 1, please. Add it to juror number 1.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Neufeld, would you retrieve 1366 from Deputy Long, please? All right, the record to reflect that each of the jurists has taken the opportunity to view Defense Exhibit 1366. Mr. Darden, you may cross-examine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Mr. Rokar, under LAPD policy, you are not required to record the exact time of each and every photograph you take, are you?
No.
You did not keep a detailed photo log in this case. That is a log indicating the exact time in which you took each
No, sir.
photograph. Any time that you might give us today as to when you took a particular photograph is an estimate on your part. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It's your best estimate.
As good as I can do after a year,
Okay. After 15 months, actually.
15 months.
Now, you have always had some problem in trying to remember the exact time at which you took each of these photographs. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, objection, this fact's not in evidence.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Isn't it true that you've always had some problem remembering the exact time in which you took each of the photographs in this case?
Objection.
Overruled.
Considering I photograph an average of 2 to 3 homicides every night, I cannot remember the times.
In fact, you were interviewed by an LAPD detective LaFaw, November 22, 1994, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And when you were interviewed by Detective LaFaw, you told him that you arrived at Bundy shortly after midnight. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
But later on, you looked at your own log and realized that you didn't get the call to go out to Bundy until 2:48 in the morning. Is that
He
right?
interviewed me by phone at my home, and I had, of course, very little recollection what time, and I was obviously wrong in the statement I made.
Okay. Now, as you begin to take photographs at a crime scene, you take a photograph of a,
Or a slate.
I'm sorry?
We call it a slate.
Okay, and is there a slate depicted here in
1366.
1366?
Yes, the very first photograph. It's got my name up here, my serial numbers, and the what we call a C form for this particular job, and the location of the job.
Okay, and so this C form or slate is exposure number 0.
Number 0, yeah.
Okay, and that slate indicates that you got the call at 2:48, correct?
Yes, sir.
And not only did you not arrive at the scene at shortly after midnight, but in fact you arrived at the scene at about 3:25 in the morning. Is that
So
correct?
somewhere after 3 o'clock.
Okay, and you did sign in on the log. Is that right?
I did sign in on the log.
But you've also had problems recalling the exact time in which you took these photographs because of your health. Is that right?
That is,
No testimony at all about that.
Facts not in evidence.
Facts not in evidence.
Thank you. Sustain.
It's false.
Sustain.
Are you having health problems?
yes, I do.
Were you having health problems last year?
Yes, I did.
Congestive heart failure?
That is correct.
You also have a painful nerve disease.
That is correct.
You take, strike that. You have been prescribed approximately 13 medications that you take on a daily basis. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do they include Vicodin?
Yes.
What is that?
Vicodin is a painkiller.
You take one tablet or capsule every 4 hours.
That is correct.
Did you take Vicodin yesterday when you spoke to Mr. Neufeld?
I carry about 8 pills on me when I go to work.
Okay. And, were you feeling well yesterday when you spoke to Mr. Neufeld?
I haven't really felt well for a long time.
When you spoke to Detective LaFaw in November, we'll strike that. After you took the overall photographs, did you wait in your car for detectives?
I waited, I'm not sure whether I was sitting in my car or just leaning up against it.
Okay. Do you recall telling Detective LaFall on November 22, 1994, page 2 of that statement, Mr. Neufeld, that you had completed all of the overall photographs and was waiting in the vehicle, in your vehicle, for the detective's arrival?
I remember getting a phone call from Detective LaFall, but I, at this point, really don't remember what all was said.
The bottom line is that you can't tell this jury at what time you took photos 34 and 35, is that correct?
It's extremely,
Seems facts not in evidence.
You can answer the question.
You didn't look at your watch each and every
Excuse me,
time?
counsel, I don't think you finished answering the
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry. Okay, the bottom line, sir, is that you can't tell this jury at what time you took photos 34 and 35, is that correct?
that is correct.
You don't know.
The only time recorded on my paperwork is when we leave the scene.
Now, the contact sheet in front of you, by looking at that contact sheet, you can tell the sequence in which the photographs were taken. Is that correct?
And that is assuming the negatives were placed in the correct order. The negatives are cut into strips, 5 negatives each, and I'm not sure who made this contact sheet. If we go by the Kodak numbers, I would say they were in proper order.
Okay. And you can also tell by looking at that contact sheet that you received the call at 2:48, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. But you can't tell by looking at the contact sheet how much time elapsed between each photograph. Is that right?
That is correct. I could not
And
tell.
You can't tell by looking at that contact sheet the exact time it was when you took the last photograph on that particular roll, correct?
No, I could not.
And even though you have a counter, a photo counter built into your camera, right?
Right?
That counter doesn't indicate the time in which you take a particular photograph either.
That is correct. It does not.
What you've done here today is you've testified to the best of your ability. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm trying to.
Okay, you weren't trying to avoid answering questions by Mr. Neufeld?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Neufeld?
Mr. Okar, you said that you sometimes photograph as many as 2 or 3 homicides a night,
That is correct.
but on this particular night, this was the only homicide you handled, correct?
That was the only homicide I handled.
And in fact, this was an unusual homicide. There was a lot of brass there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that doesn't happen at most of the cases which you photographed, does it?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, when I interviewed you yesterday at the Los Angeles Police Department, sir, did we have a calm conversation?
Yes, we did.
I didn't raise my voice, did I?
No, you were very nice.
Okay, and during that hour and a half that we were talking, sir, did you at any time complain about your health?
I felt there was no reason
Okay.
to do so.
And sir, you mentioned on cross-examination that you may not be, absolutely certain as to what time a particular photograph, or precisely what time a particular photograph was taken. But would you agree, sir, that there is a difference between a photograph taken a half hour, an hour before sunrise, and a photograph taken an hour and a half after the sun comes up, in terms of the light in the air?
Light in the air?
In terms of, I'm sorry, in terms of how light it is, that there is an obvious difference between a photograph taken an hour to an hour and a half before the sun rises and a photograph taken an hour to an hour and a half after the sun rises.
Yes. Yes, there is a difference.
And sir, if the sun rises that morning at 5:41 a.m., you would be able to tell the difference, without being precise, whether that photograph was a nighttime shot perhaps an hour and a half before sunrise, and one shot an hour and a half after sunrise, wouldn't you?
I would like to think so.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Mr. Darden?
Mr. Rokar, how many homicide scenes have you photographed since June 13, 1994?
I conservatively to do about 10 a month. So there's a couple of hundred at least.
Thank you.
One last question. Besides the fact that all the brass was there that night when you were shooting at Bundy, given the notoriety of this case,
Sustain.
during the intervening 14 months that Mr. Darden referred to, was this the most important case that you photographed?
I would say so.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Darden?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, Mr. Rokar, thank you very much, sir. You may step down. Mr. Neufeld, would you retrieve 1366B? All right, next witness. Next witness. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you to step back into the jury room for just a few moments. All right, Mr. Cochran, who's your next witness?
Your Honor, I'd just like to serve on prosecution and to the court a letter memorandum with respect to a request for sanctions for failing to disclose or permit the creation of contact prints. And we have a proposed instruction that we would like the court to give to the jury on this matter.
All right.
Now that the testimony of Mr. Rokar has been completed and the factual record is complete, we think it's very plain that, as indicated in our Brady motion, what the problems are here, and I'm sure the court's familiar with the discovery problems we had.
Mr. Cochran, next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The next one is, I think I indicated to the court again that, and I would reiterate this again, that what I would like to do, if the court would allow us to, is to allow us to argue our motion for reconsideration on Ms. McKinny, or my motion for reconsideration to Your Honor prior to calling McKinny, plus a couple other motions, because it bears upon what we're able to do if you change your mind in any particular. We'd like to play the tape for you of what you're allowing us to play to the jury as far as Ferman's words. And we think it's very relevant for McKinney's call. And then I want to reiterate again and ask Your Honor to read the transcript at page 18899, because, as I said before, given Bailey's question, Mr. Bailey's question, which is very specific, we have an absolute right, it seems to me, to impeach Ferman based upon this. This is the only witness on our defense list that can testify that Ferman used this word in addressing him as an African American. So it's not cumulative at all. And what I'd like, in the best of all worlds, for you to listen to the argument regarding McKinney. Let us call McKinney. Let us play what we're going to play on that, then call Hajj. If Your Honor rules that we can, this is permissible on Hajj, then I would go ahead and call Hajj now and then take the rest of the day dealing with McKinney. But I would like, if I could, as you say, we can put our case on the way we want to, I would like to deal with, I'd like to get a ruling for you on Hajj, deal with McKinney, call McKinney and Hajj. But if you want to get more testimony before this jury, I would then move Hajj up for this limited area we're talking about. And I'd ask you to read this page 18899. I think it's very controlling and very compelling, and he is the only witness we have, the only African-American we have who can refute Ferman's insistence that he never addressed any African-American with this word. The only one. Everybody else is white.
Is that it?
That's it for right now.
Mr. Darden?
Well, I think we've spread enough venom around for one day and for one trial, Judge. As I said before, we have not challenged, we did not challenge the earlier witness's assertion that Ferman used these epithets. I mean, just reflect on the things you have allowed this jury to hear as they relate to Ferman's racial animus. And I'm sure the court noted that throughout that testimony, each of these jurors, well, they were writing like crazy. It seemed as if they wrote down each and every word, as if they hung on each and every word. And at some point, you know, I think the court has to remember, and I'm sure the court does, that we have a right to a fair trial just like this defendant. Okay? We have gone way too far, way off the mark in this, I believe. The epithet was uttered. Consider the context in which it was uttered and which was heard by this jury, Your Honor. What more can they want? I think McKinny is cumulative at this point, especially on an issue like this, which is collateral. And if the court disagrees that it's collateral, then it's only marginally beyond being collateral. At any event, you know, we can't be allowed to turn this trial into the trial of People versus Ferman, or rather Cochran versus Ferman, or Simpson versus Ferman, or whomever, Bailey versus Ferman. I mean, we've heard this word thrown around throughout the courtroom today. I've heard that term more by Mr. Bailey than any other white individual I've ever heard it from in my entire life, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that agree
Mr.
with
Darden,
that.
why don't you address the legal issue that Mr. Cochran raises, that the only African-American that has been proffered at this point is Mr. Hajj, to say that I am an African-American who was referred to by Mark Ferman in this manner.
Well,
Although the record, thankfully, to this point, is colorblind as to who's who and what's what.
well, now we know. I mean, I think now the record indicates that everyone else before Mr. Hajj was Caucasian. And the defense chose the order of their witnesses. Okay, they knew, apparently, I noticed, I'm sure they noticed the racial makeup of each of the witnesses they called today. Do we have to have a certain number of witnesses from certain ethnic or racial groups? Having chose the order of witnesses that they selected, to come to the court now and say, hey, we need to have an African American testify to this, I think is unfair. I think it's unnecessary. I think it's cumulative. As I said before, the words came in. We let them come in, Judge. We didn't fight it. You know, we fought our battle in the 352 and in the 402s and before the court. And when it came time to present this testimony before the jury, we let it come. This is enough. There is still the issue of the mini trial of Mr. Hajj. And it's going to take, I believe, well beyond this afternoon. If Mr. Cochran is 20 minutes with Mr. Hajj, we'll be here until 5:30 on cross.
But why would you do that? Why would the prosecution do that? Why wouldn't the prosecution just say, gee, Mr. Hajj, you found it insulting, gee, that's horrible, thank you very much, goodbye?
Well, we gave the court some information in the 1054-7. That's why.
I understand that, but given what you're dealing with at this point. But I'm more interested in Mr. Cochran's proffer that this is the only African American who's going to be offered, who is going to say that Mr. Ferman referred to me in this way under these circumstances.
As my colleagues have pointed out to me, if he was so important to the defense, why then didn't they call him earlier? I mean, you mentioned to the defense and have over the past several days the issue, the 352 issue, as to whether or not some of this testimony is
I've
cumulative.
given them pretty good warning that at some point in time it will be redundant.
Yeah. You know, you put me in an awful position when you ask me to argue to you why an African American shouldn't be allowed to testify in front of this jury judge.
Well, Mr.
On
Darden,
this
I
issue.
sincerely, I apologize to you for putting you in that position, but you're a professional. You and I have known each other for years and years and years. I know you're up to it. I know that this is a tremendous burden that's placed upon you, and I don't envy your position, but nor do I envy my own.
Now, you know how it feels, somewhat. But I would say this, that I have some doubt that what he says occurred, and so I feel ethically and morally bound to cross-examine him on those issues. But I mean, there are issues of whether or not he was arrested and acquitted, and all kinds of other things, or whether Ferman is the arresting officer or the transporting officer. There are all kinds of issues that have to be dealt with here. And then we have to call other people to follow up on this stuff. I mean, you know, Marcia Clark and Sherry Lewis and I, you know, we don't like these words, you know.
Well, let me ask another interesting question. Mr. Cochran, do you have an arrest report to support this incident?
No, I don't, Your Honor. I have a arrest report. I've talked to this witness. He has a lawyer who's present, and
Do you have a court file that you said that there was
No.
the subsequent arrest and prosecution resulted in an acquittal?
no, I don't have it. I have the defendant himself, who said he was the former defendant. Said he was arrested for.
No, I'm just asking. Do you have?
No, I don't. I have the lawyer. I have the defendant, the former defendant, and the lawyer himself, Your Honor.
The lawyer who defended him in that case?
No, but his present lawyer. He now lives in another state. He's been out here for over a week. Can I just respond just briefly, Your Honor?
No, I'm just want you to answer my.
No, I don't.
I'm
No,
not
the answer
done
is no.
discussing the matter with Mr. Darden.
Okay, no. I don't have the court file. Maybe the lawyer does.
I should, well, let's see what they have for us. Yesterday's race day.
All I have is a couple of pages of an arrest report that indicates Ferman is one of the arresting officers.
All right, may I see that, please?
Can I explain to my understanding of that issue?
Let me see what the arrest report says.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Would you like to print copy?
Which?
1889.
No, I am quite familiar with it. Ah, a phone.
Take it, take it. Eddie Goldman's phone. Take it, Judge.
It was. I'm sorry? Certainly. Let Mr. Darden
Sure.
peruse the report.
This report is not dated, and Mr. Hajj is listed as an outstanding suspect in this report. He is not listed as having been arrested.
The DR number, though, indicates it's an 87 incident.
It is an 87 incident.
Yes.
Can I explain to the court my understanding of what happened here? As I understand it, officers other than Officer Ferman observed Mr. Hajj sell cocaine to a gentleman named Thompson.
I object to that because this man was acquitted of that, and that's unfair to him to say that in court. This man has been acquitted, and I think that's unfair.
And he has been acquitted, if I could just continue. That was the allegation. The officers moved in to arrest Mr. Hajj and Mr. Thompson. Mr. Hajj fled. As he fled, he apparently encountered Officer Ferman, knocking Ferman to the ground. Hajj got away and was listed as an outstanding suspect on this 11352 arrest report. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Hajj were later prosecuted, and Mr. Hajj was acquitted of the narcotics sales. Officer Ferman did not testify in the narcotics case because he was not a witness to the alleged transaction. Okay, so that Mr. Hajj was acquitted at trial on the narcotics violation is irrelevant. In fact, Mr. Ferman was not listed as a witness by the prosecution in that matter.
All right, does the district attorney have a file in this case?
I have a file on Hajj and Thompson, yes.
Hold on. Then, this was an arrest warrant situation with Mr. Hajj?
Situation. This transaction, the narcotics transaction, occurred on January 10, as I recall. He was arrested on the 13th.
And that's as a result of an arrest warrant?
I believe so.
And Mr. Cochran, it's then at that point in time that's alleged that Detective Ferman said to Mr. Hajj, I told you we'd get you.
Yes, Your Honor. May I put it in perspective for you? What happened was that Mr. Hajj knew Mr. Ferman very, very well. So he'd stopped him over 20 times, harassing him, messing with him, and he had called and made complaints about it. They would stop him all the time. Stopped him once on a bicycle. Stopped him on this occasion. He never knew it was Ferman that he ran into. In fact, he was charged with battering a police officer. Now, don't you think if they can make that case, if he'd ran into this officer intentionally, he would have been charged with a crime. That charge was dismissed. That's what happened. But when he arrested him on this occasion, they had him spread eagle in an alleyway. And Ferman and his partner walked up and lifted him up by his handcuffs and took him and put him in their car, took him to jail and turned back and said, I told you I would get you so-and-so, with the racial slur. And then when so I mean, it's absolutely clear. They can try to hide all this. They can ask him whatever they want to ask. But this is the one witness that we have who has been confronted by this man, who had contact with him, who can testify, Your Honor, to how this man acted in the streets vis-a-vis him. And I agree it's irrelevant material what happened at the trial. I don't plan to bring out he's acquitted unless they want to go into that. I don't want to go into that. I told you what I wanted to go into, Your Honor.
Wasn't that offer of proof different from the ones we've heard so far? I mean, we've heard so far about something at the jail and something in the car, and now we have something at the scene where it's lifted up. And
No, my understanding of the material aspect of the offer was that at the time of the arrest, while in the car, while in the police car, while Mr. Hajj was back in the custody section of the patrol car, Detective Ferman turned to him and said, I told you we'd get you, etc. That's the offer of proof that I've heard thus far.
Right.
Also heard the bending over incident over.
Search at the jail. There was a strip search at the jail later. You recall that?
I think we've sank far
I
enough.
recall it. I don't know there's necessarily material to
Well, I just
anything.
want to make sure we did talk about that also.
Yes, we did talk about that.
There's a matter of his numerous contacts with law enforcement, and it doesn't appear that all those contacts involve Detective Ferman. Those are issues to cross-examine him on. The 20 to 25 contacts that Mr. Cochran has alluded to today, there appears to be no record of all of those contacts between he and Detective Ferman.
How do
And
you
then there's the
plan-
1054.7 package we gave the court.
Well, that may become germane in impeachment. And then we turn into the trial of Mr. Hajj.
Trial number 3.
Uh,
May I respond to that?
Well, I'm just musing at this point. All right, Mr. Cochran.
Yes, so we can get right through this. We're trying to get this testimony up, Your Honor. Since we began our case 6 weeks ago, they've objected to every witness we've ever called. This is nothing new. We made you the offer of proof. We spelled it out as much as we can. They have what we have. I can't control what they do in cross-examination. We welcome their cross-examination. We welcome to spend the next couple hours with this jury if they want to do it. The relevant portion is this witness they're trying to protect. Refer to this man by the N-word. It's inappropriate. He's an African-American. We should have a right to do that. He's the one witness, and it goes directly to impeach what he said to Bailey. The other things, I'm not that worried about. The other trial, I'm not that worried about. We're trying to cut through this and get to McKinney and get to the end of this case, Judge. That's all we're trying to do. And I would indicate to you, in the best world, you give me a ruling I could do this, and I'd have Hajj come after her because we want to make certain points to you on McKinney. But as I said, I would be willing to be governed by what you would order in this regard.
Your Honor, they could have put Mr. Hajj on last week.
Let me address that. Yes, I could have called Hajj. They said, why don't we call Hajj? I was going to call Hajj on Friday. And then you recall, Your Honor, you started talking about cumulative, and that's why I specifically got this particular excerpt from the transcript to point out to you, the Honor, exactly why this is relevant. Yes, we had Hajj here. Hajj came here from Chicago, Judge. He's been here like over a week because we didn't want to run out of witnesses. Yes, we could have called him. We could have called Singer, could have called Terry, but the court did indicate to us at some point this would become cumulative. And as you recall, we listened. And so we're trying to fashion this in a fashion now so that no longer do you think it's cumulative or redundant, so we can resolve this point. These are the last two witnesses in this area. Hajj stands by himself, and you know the situation with McKinney, and we need hearings before we get to McKinney.
Judge, you're going to let you're going to let Miss McKinney testify that he used the word 41 times. Now,
Judge, can I say something? This was their witness. We didn't make this up. This is their witness. So now they're stuck with it. Can't we just get this on and stop all this whining? Let's get it over with.
no, the Goldmans and Browns have rights too. I think the
Judge,
penal-
that is
I think the
preposterous. We
penal
have to hear this
code
every few minutes, Your Honor.
indicates-
Wait. All right, you propose to present Mr. Hajj, and then you want to argue the motion on the scope of McKinney.
Yes, and motion for reconsideration, and I think your court's aware of which all ties in. And then we'll be ready to proceed on that. I mean, I think that you've got our papers. They filed something, and that's it. I think that'll take us to the end of the day.
They insist on going on with this racial business. I think it would only be fair that the court require them to call McKinney now so that we can then take up the 352 issue again as to Hajj. I mean, at some point, it is cumulative.
We've argued
I
already,
mean,
Your Honor.
all that the jury is, well, we have argued already. Now they want you to reconsider the past arguments and P's and A's and proffers and submissions and
But see, they're
tapes.
gambling, too, that I'm not going to find McKinney cumulative at that point, since I haven't heard Hajj.
Judge, did you just hear me say, though, however, did you hear me say, Your Honor, in the best of the situation, I want you to rule on Hajj, and I want you to call McKinney first. I said that very clearly, Your Honor. So there's not much of a gamble if I get the ruling and we move ahead, and I've pared it down. So I'm trying to try this case and get it over, Your Honor. So that's it.
All right.
I'm sorry. Why are we even arguing Hajj now then if McKinney's coming first?
Because the court will recall why I said that at the beginning. Because I said that once you gave us the ruling, we'd know how we'd finish out the day and be ready to come back tomorrow with whatever we have left. And that this would make it a lot easier because I said that if you felt this jury needed to hear something else, I would move Hajj up if you felt that. But in the best of all worlds, I wanted Hajj after McKinney. That's why I made it very clear. I've said that a number of times, Your Honor. I'd like to be able to proceed, Your Honor.
Judge, this is all collateral. I mean, isn't genocide enough? Isn't having witnesses testify that Mark Ferman
Well,
believes
counsel,
in genocide enough?
would you do me one favor, though? The argument, the only argument that Mr. Cochran has made that has any merit to it is the fact that Mr. Hajj is an African American. This is the only individual that they have proffered to whom this was said by Detective Ferman.
The probative value, the fact that Mr. Hajj is African American is what? Given what we have heard already. Okay, I think it would be apparent to the jury that Mr. Hajj is included in all of the in the genocide and all the other things Detective Ferman allegedly said and was testified to here in court. Okay, what is the probative value of that?
That, the probative value is that it's directly impeaching of Detective Ferman. I want to deal with this on a legal basis. All this emotion has got to go by the wayside. This is impeaching of their witness, and that's all we're asking to do here. It's impeaching. And that you cut right to the chase and to the argument and the issues here, and that's the issue. We have a right to do that, and that's all we're asking to do. I would just ask you to allow us to do it after McKinney.
We have all but conceded the issue, Judge. Okay.
All but. All right. My inclination at this point, because it is a statement that is directly contradictory to what was testified to, is to allow that statement in the police car, period. Fact of the arrest, fact of prior acquaintanceship, prior contacts upon the arrest in January of '87, in the police car this statement was made, period. All right? That's the ruling. Who is your next witness?
Given that, you guys have the part of mine, can we now argue the motion on McKinney and say it comes down to the victim? So we'd like to do, we'd like to proceed with Ms. Jean Uelmen regarding this case. Thank you. They're telling me that we'll call Hajj.
All right, do you have your package on Hajj? Mr. Darden? I'm addressing Mr. Darden. Do you have your package on Mr. Hajj? I call McKinney, so let's go with McKinney. I'm not going to wait for them to drag boxes
All
down.
right, well, before we call McKinney, we are, we'll start listening to Mr. Jean Uelmen.
All right, Mr. Uelmen.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lewis, are you going to argue this?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Are you arguing the motion, the reconsideration?
You want to argue this?
Mr. Uelmen.
Ms. Clark is going to be arguing that, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the opportunity to...
I'm sorry, just one request. Has the court had an opportunity to read the brief that I filed in response?
Yes.
Thank you.
Your Honor,
Which is essentially the Christian Reichard response with some modifications.
That's right, it's the same law.
I read it.
I'd like to start with that. We don't have a message from God, but a lot has happened since somebody tried to deliver that message this morning, and I think we need to look at this issue in the context in which the court must now address the testimony of Ms. McKinney. And that posture is very different than it was even yesterday. As the court initially approached this problem, it viewed the defense's attack on the credibility of Detective Ferman.
Well, let's focus in on what's changed between last week and today.
All right. We now, Your Honor, have 5 counts of perjury. Detective Ferman not only testified that he had not used the word, the N-word, in 10 years, but he also testified, Your Honor will recall, that as soon as he got the word that robbery homicide was taking over the case, he went and waited on the street. We now have testimony from Mr. Rokar that after that call would have come in about robbery homicide taking over the case, Detective Ferman is guiding the photographer through the crime scene. Your Honor will also recall, and this is count 3, that Detective Ferman testified that before he went to the Rockingham scene, the closest he got to the physical evidence surrounding the bodies was standing on a landing looking down at them. And he testified that another detective pointed out to him where the glove and the hat were. That, Your Honor, appears at pages 18134 through 18136 of the transcript. Count 4 is that Detective Ferman testified under oath that the photograph depicting him kneeling in the midst of the crime scene, pointing to the hat and the glove with his finger inches from the glove, was taken at 7 a.m. after he had been to Rockingham and returned to the Bundy scene to compare the gloves and see if the Bundy glove was similar to the glove he allegedly had just discovered at Rockingham. And that testimony appears at 18369 through 18371 of the transcript. And count 5, we would contend, is the inconsistency between Detective Ferman's description of the door of the Bronco when he said he saw a second stain with 4 brush marks, and the testimony of criminalist Fung, who testified that the only way you could observe those brush marks was if the door of the Bronco was open, contradicting Detective Ferman's testimony that he had never opened the door of the Bronco or been into the Bronco. Now, the significance of all of that is that when we talk about the credibility of Detective Ferman, what motive would he have to lie about how close he got to the evidence in this case? What motive would there be to try to cover up the fact that this photograph was actually taken early in the morning hours, shortly after the photographer arrived and took the setting shots, that here we have indisputable evidence of Detective Ferman kneeling in the midst of the evidence with his finger inches away from the glove? Why would there be any reason to lie about that except to try to disguise and conceal the access and the opportunity that Detective Ferman actually had? Now, I think that's important because Your Honor was deciding this motion with respect to the Laura McKinney tapes based on a false premise. And the false premise was the argument by the people that there's no way this could have happened because someone was with Ferman every minute. He didn't have access to the evidence, so there's no way he could have physically picked up a glove and taken that glove to the Rockingham premises. I think the other false premise of the court's ruling was that the defense theory is simply to prove that Detective Ferman moved a glove from one place to another in order to frame an innocent man. And that, of course, has never been our contention. We don't, of course, have the burden of explaining how that glove got to Rockingham, but we are certainly contending it didn't get there by O.J. Simpson transporting it there. But the motive for a detective to bring evidence from one scene to another may have been other than simply a conscious effort to frame an innocent person. It may have been simply to take probable cause with you when you go to a scene so that you will be sure to be able to get a search warrant, you will be sure to be able to search for all of the evidence that you think you might find if you have already come to the conclusion that you've got the right suspect. And that is why we believe that the words of Detective Ferman on those tapes are so critical and so relevant and so essential to the defense theory of the case. Because on those tapes, you have Detective Ferman claiming the ability by instinct to determine who is worthy of being arrested and convicted of a crime. You have him admitting that on occasion he himself has made up the probable cause necessary to carry out an arrest. You have him describing how he believes a police officer should act immediately on his instinct and then make up the reasons later. And we believe there is ample reason in this record right now to believe that that is precisely what happened in this case, and we have a right to confront Detective Ferman with these statements by him in terms of the way in which he went about getting probable cause in other cases.
That's a completely different argument, counsel. Whether or not you have the right to recall Detective Ferman and confront him with these things, that's a different issue.
Well, I take it then Your Honor's ruling, and this is one point of clarification that will be very helpful to us. Your Honor's ruling does not preclude us from questioning Detective Ferman about the information on that tape when we get him on the witness stand.
That issue is not presented.
All right? Thank you. That's a very helpful clarification. With respect to the portions of the tape that Your Honor indicated we can play at this point when we call Ms. McKinny to the stand, Your Honor indicated that we could elicit that the epithet was used 41 times in the period 1985 and 1986. I believe Your Honor may have misspoke in the order, because the evidence is that in 1985 and 1986, the epithet was used 35 times. 6 of the uses of the epithet occurred in 1987 and 1988.
The problem I have with that factual assertion is the labeling on the tapes themselves.
I believe the testimony of Ms. McKinney at the 402 supported that the tapes from which we have 5 of the uses of the term were made in, or was made in 1987, and the transcript in which we have the 41st use of the term was in 1988.
Right.
So what we would like to do is elicit that the term was used 41 times between 1985 and 1988. The single tape that Your Honor selected that the jury could hear of Detective Ferman actually uttering the epithet, and I don't know whether this was accidental or Your Honor consciously tried to find a tape where Detective Ferman's voice would be least recognizable or least legible. But
Why would I do that?
well, that's what we were trying to figure out. But that is the fact, Your Honor. The one incident that you indicated we could use the tape, the voice of Detective Ferman is lost in a clatter of background noise, and it truly is. Of the 40, well, of the 18 or 19 that we have on tape, really the least legible of all of them. And we have some alternatives that we believe are no more inflammatory, no more prejudicial than the one that Your Honor selected, in which the voice can be heard much more legibly. And we would ask Your Honor to seriously consider allowing us to use an alternative to the particular item that you selected, just for purpose.
And which two are those?
We have a tape, Your Honor, with the alternatives available that I think we can play in like 5 minutes, so Your Honor would have an opportunity of seeing.
Well, tell me which one they are. Since I've been over these things several times, I'll recollect which ones
Yes.
they are.
They are 17, 18,
That's
26, and 27.
Sounds like 4 to me.
Well, these are 4 alternatives in which the voice can be much more clearly heard than in the alternative that Your Honor selected.
And what is the text in your transcript? For 17 and 18, my recollection, are a dual usage in a single passage, correct?
I believe so. '17 would be practicing his martial arts movements The term is niggers, they're easy. I used to practice my kicks. 18, don't they think they are physically capable? They can arm wrestle 6 foot 7 inch ends. 26, would just be the first two lines. Westwood is gone, the ends have discovered it when they start moving into Redondo and Torrance, and that would be all we would use. And 27 is discussing female police officers. They don't do anything, they don't go out there and initiate a contact with some 6'5" N that's been in prison for 7 years pumping weights. On all of these, the voice of Detective Ferman is recognizable. The use of the term is recognizable, and we don't believe that either of those facts are true with respect to the single taped incident that Your Honor previously indicated we would be allowed to use. The final point I want to make, and I know Your Honor has read our papers and seriously thought about the scope of Your Honor's ruling, is the extent of eliminating all but use of the word when the context in which the word is used itself reflects the racial animus. And we believe that even if Detective Ferman had never been asked, have you used the N-word in the last 10 years, even if that question had never been asked, even if he hadn't lied about it, the fact of his racial animus would still be admissible to challenge his credibility. And by sanitizing these tapes to remove the racial animus, we are depriving the jury of evidence that it needs to assess the weight that should be given to his testimony. And I think it would be quite reasonable for a jury to look in terms of what weight they're going to give to a person's testimony. And here we're talking about all of his testimony about entering the Bronco, his testimony about what he did at the Bundy crime scene before he went to Rockingham, all of his testimony. They are going to look at someone who is a virulent, spiteful, angry racist differently than they're going to look at someone who is a casual racist, who is not animated and motivated.
But given the testimony of Miss Bell, who said that it caused her to almost to break into tears, that he was angry, and he said it in a very aggressive and hostile and arrogant way, and then Miss Singer's testimony, which was even more graphic in describing the tone and demeanor of how it was said, haven't we established that already?
I don't believe we have, Your Honor. I don't believe we have even plumbed yet the depths of the hatefulness and spite of Detective Mark Ferman. And until we do...
The issue here is whether or not the jury has sufficient information to put this man's credibility in appropriate context. That's the issue.
Well, it's more than just a question of credibility. It's a question of what weight they will give to his testimony. And we believe that that is a quantitative as well as a qualitative judgment. And what we are doing really is depriving the jury of the quantitative portion of it. We are depriving them of really getting a flavor that we got from listening to those tapes of how trustworthy or how credible this man is.
I wouldn't call it a flavor.
Well, it's certainly a distasteful flavor, but a flavor it is.
Now, Dean Uelmen, why don't you anticipate the argument is going to be that no facts have changed, that for example, the photograph of Detective Ferman It's apparent that it appears to be nighttime. I mean, that's something that was known to you, or should have been known, or should have been easily discernible based upon what the photograph was and how it is depicted.
Quite to the contrary, Your Honor. What we were given at the outset of this trial was a stack of photographs, without any order, without any indication in what order they were taken. Many of them were flash photographs, and you can't necessarily tell just by looking at a flash photograph whether it was taken at day or night. I think on close examination of this photograph, there are indications that someone who's clued in or tuned in to that problem can tell. But when you look at the sequence of the contact print, it's overwhelming, the significance of depriving us of the opportunity of seeing these photographs in sequence. And that's why we're asking for sanctions, and we think very serious sanctions are warranted. Your Honor was actually deprived of the information you should have had before you even considered the admissibility of the McKinny tapes, because this evidence had not yet even been produced at that time. It was only when it was to the convenience and to the benefit of the prosecution to put contact prints together, because their witness from the FBI asked for them, that we ever had the opportunity to see the sequence of these photographs. That is a cover-up. It is a cover-up of perjured testimony in this case. That's the only way to look at it. And we were deprived of that information until 1 week ago when we saw those contact prints for the first time. Even though we had asked for those contact prints months ago at the outset of this trial and were told it was impossible. They could not produce contact prints. We believe that evidence is highly significant, not only to Your Honor's ruling, but, of course, to the credibility of Detective Ferman.
Thank you, Counsel.
I'm about neck deep in rhetoric and hyperbole. I'm not going to add to it. But if you can call a contact sheet evidence of a cover-up, I guess you can see where the defense arguments go. Smoke and mirrors and a lot of hot air and a lot of big talk and a lot of nasty accusations that aren't backed up with evidence. What we have here in these contact sheets is nothing more than they've already had throughout this trial. Those photographs, Your Honor, all have numbers stamped on them. The sequence is shown on the photographs themselves. You can't miss it. I mean, that's how I was able to sequence them. I got a stack of photographs in the beginning of this case that I had to sit down and put in sequence. And I did it by looking at the number that's stamped on the lower right-hand corner of each and every photograph that they have and that we have. And it's nothing being covered up. There's nothing hidden. They've always known the sequence of these photographs. If they couldn't figure it out, they could ask us. I could tell them, there's a number on the photograph. It's very simple stuff. You know, there's nothing to get all excited about, a conspiracy. We didn't go and black out the numbers on their copy, Your Honor. We wouldn't have had time. And who would want to? They have them. They have all that information. Look at what you've got. I mean, I can give it to them. I can't make them read it. That's really the bottom line. They've had it for now over a year. And now they're complaining that they didn't know how to put them in sequence. I hope that's not what they're arguing. But I mean, that's the value of the argument that you're getting here. Now, they wanted a contact sheet. They get it. It adds no new information, and that's a cover-up. It's ridiculous. It is absurd. Mr. Uelmen stands up and argues out of both sides of his mouth simultaneously. What a feat. He says that you cannot really tell when pictures are taken with a flash, whether it's during the daytime or at night. But except in these two last ones with Detective Ferman, you can really tell. Oh, come on. If you can't tell, you can't tell. That's the bottom line. And to me, I mean, I look at the photographs, the last two in the roll, and it's very apparent what happened here. Rokar was at the scene for quite a long time. In between his overalls, he took the first 33. They are all overalls of the general scene, and none of them are specifically of any item of evidence. It is not until much later when Detective Ferman gets back and does as instructed by Detective Van Adder to go look at the glove and see if they look like a matched pair, that he goes over and he points it out. Now, he's not the only one who testified to that. Officer Risky said that just before he got off duty at 7:30, he saw Officer Ferman come back from Rockingham, take the photographer over to the scene, and move the bush back so he could point out the evidence. And that area happens to be dark with foliage, as Rokar testified. There's no big mystery here, and not the rudeness of counsel and not their unfounded allegations will change the truth.
Why don't you address the legal issue on motions to reconsider, counsel?
Yes, and that's, I meant to start with that, Your Honor. I got sidetracked.
That would help.
There is
me a
no,
lot.
I'm sorry, there is no legal provision for a motion for reconsideration in criminal law. That is only in civil law. It is recognized in Civil Code of Procedures, Section 1008, and what they require in civil law is that the party seeking reconsideration show newly discovered facts. In this case, we have no newly discovered facts with respect to the motion for reconsideration of Laura McKinney.
But doesn't the case law dealing with that particular code section include criminal cases? If you shepherdize that, you come up with some criminal
We
cases.
did. I believe that none were found, Your Honor. We don't have any in our motion, which leads me to believe that, no, there aren't any criminal cases under that section. And
Sure.
you asked me that question because you knew Ms. Lewis wrote the motion, huh? But, no, as far as I know, there are no criminal law cases that involve that section because it's not recognized in criminal law. So, I mean, at least in theory, we didn't have to have all the argument. But,
So if my Pepperdine law clerks found some,
did they? Criminal cases? And what do they say?
say it's applicable to criminal law cases.
Okay. Nevertheless, we
deals
don't have
with
any newly...
sanctions.
I'm sorry, Your Honor?
Never mind.
Okay.
There's a rule in the
Still need-
there's a rule in the civil procedure that an unfounded motion for reconsideration is the subject of sanctions. Just an aside. Not relevant to this situation.
Oh, you saw my motion coming.
No.
But with respect to this particular case, they don't have newly discovered evidence to point to, Your Honor. The contact sheet doesn't qualify. That contact sheet is nothing but a collection of the photographs they've had for a year and 3 months. So we have nothing new that's been offered to this court. We do have, however, as I've indicated to the court earlier, Officer Risky testified that he saw the photograph being taken at 7 a.m. shortly before he got off duty. Mr. Uelmen poses the question, why lie about the time? Well, that's to cover up. If that's to cover up the ability or opportunity to conceal or remove evidence, then why is he standing there in the photograph pointing to the evidence? I mean, is that the stupidest thing you've ever heard? Hi, Mom. You know, I'm going to move some evidence now. What is this? If he's trying to hide himself and conceal himself, then you certainly do not get close to the evidence. You don't step into the scene. You don't stand there and point to it. You stay way back in the shadows. That's not what he did. It's clearly not what he did. He was working. He was doing as he was told. Detective Van Adder told him what to do, and he did it. It's very, very clear what happened. And all of these nefarious implications that they're seeking to draw from very minor things, you know, that in no case would you ever see anyone try to make as big a deal as they have about a contact sheet. It doesn't mean it's so just because they keep saying it, Your Honor. It's nothing more than the barest of allegations. That's all it is. They have nothing to back up any of this stuff, just like they have nothing to back up the motion for reconsideration. And in this case, you want to reconsider something, let me ask you this. You've allowed Ms. Bell to testify to the utterance in 1985. You've allowed Ms. Singer to testify to 2 very ugly utterances in 1987. And now you propose to allow for Mr. Hajj to testify, although I concur with Mr. Darden, I do not think that he adds any probative value to the nature of the impeachment, which is conceitedly collateral at best. He adds nothing to them. If that's the state of the record, why are we allowing McKinney at all? She will do nothing more than reassert that at the relevant time frame that the defense has established, 85 to 87, he used the racial epithet. Now, isn't her testimony, McKinney's testimony, wholly cumulative at this point? We have gotten from 2 women and a man who happens to be African American that the racial epithet was used. So now they've established that he uses it to talk about African American people and he uses it to address African American people directly. What more can you do to impeach? I mean, what can you do? They'd like to be doing it for the next 2 years if they could. But what is appropriate in this trial? You know, the court has ruled that at a certain point it gets collateral. Well, we submit that if the court does allow Mr. Hajj to testify, it will then be completely collateral because Ms. McKinney will truly be cumulative on every issue, whether he uses the word in speaking of or when he addresses in speaking to. In fact, in some sense, Ms. McKinney is impeaching because she has him speaking to an African-American man and never using the word. Nevertheless, Your Honor, that is now truly cumulative. What is the point of Ms. McKinney? The people would urge this court, yes, to reconsider. Please do. Reconsider that Ms. McKinney is now not needed based on newly discovered fact that Mr. Hajj will be allowed to testify. Mr. Hajj will be allowed to complete the picture for them, a very ugly picture that really has no bearing on this case. And it's unfortunate that we have to paint that ugly picture for this jury again. But I cannot see how this would possibly add any information that is relevant to the picture that this jury has of this case. Mr. Uelmen is right, in a sense. You know, they will view Mr. Ferman as a racist. I cannot imagine arguing differently to this jury. And they will put his credibility in its proper perspective. If they have their way, however, Mr. Ferman's attitudes, social attitudes, will become the focal issue of this trial. And the fact that he had no opportunity to do any of the actions attributed, that they attempt to attribute to him in this case will become irrelevant because the jury will be so inflamed it will not matter to them any longer whether Mark Ferman could or could not have moved the glove. And Mr. Uelmen wants to paint the distinction between a hostile racist and a casual racist. I don't know how anyone can be a casual racist. I mean, that's to me an oxymoron. You know, you can't be that kind of an evil person and be casual about such a thing. It just doesn't happen. They've painted Mr. Ferman as being a racist. There's no doubt about it. With the additional testimony of Mr. Hajj, they will have completed that picture, spread enough venom in this courtroom to sink a battleship. We've done it enough. And Ms. McKinney is simply no longer necessary after Mr. Hodge's testimony. And we submit to this court that although it was unfortunate that we had to spend as much time as we did outside the presence of the jury litigating the McKinney tapes based on the actions of the defense has put us in this posture now. I think that your admission of the Hajj testimony should properly preclude them from calling Ms. McKinney. And that's enough, Your Honor. That's enough. Yes, the credibility of all witnesses is an issue, but his credibility is a very limited issue in this case. Because in point of fact, he could not have done what they're trying to prove he did. So it's for what? It is only collateral impeachment. And to that end, those three witnesses are much more than they're entitled to. We would urge the court to reconsider, as the defense has, but to reconsider appropriately not to allow Ms. McKinney to testify at all.
Three very brief points, Your Honor.
Reminds me of the Chinese proverb to be careful what you ask for.
The suggestion that the prosecution was well aware of the sequence of these photographs raises lots of questions in my mind in terms of whether it explains the refusal of the prosecution to make contact prints available or to make the negatives available from which we could make contact prints. It suggests to me that from the outset of the case, they were aware of the problems that might create, that have been created.
But Mr. Uelmen, let's take for granted that, you know, data backs on the back of cameras are in common usage. You can pay $40 at Fedco and get a camera that's got one of these things, and it numbers or dates the pictures. It gives you a sequence. I've seen the photographs. They do have the sequences, so it's not the strongest argument. The argument that concerns me the most is Ms. Clark's argument that I should reconsider the entire ruling and preclude Ms. McKinney in her entirety, because now that you have Singer and Hajj and Bell, you've got more than you asked for in the first place.
Your Honor.
That's the argument you need to deal with.
All right, let me address that, because obviously the point at which we want the jury to end up is to reject Detective Ferman's testimony in its entirety. And as Your Honor is aware, the instruction that informs the jury they may do that is if they find that a witness was willfully false in a material part of his testimony. Willfully false means we not only have to show that Detective Ferman was wrong when he said he had not used the N-word, but that he knew he was wrong. He knew he was lying. And if the argument can be made, I'm sure it will be made, and we will hear it from the prosecution at the end of this case, that why would Detective Ferman remember casual encounters with two women in 1985 and 1986? Every iota of evidence that we have that shows the frequency with which he used this term goes to that question of whether he was willfully lying when he said he had not used the word. We believe the fact that he used it 41 times in the course of transcribed, tape-recorded conversations, and the fact that he was well aware that transcripts and tapes of these conversations were in existence, would have gone through his mind at the very moment he uttered the perjured testimony that he presented in this court. So we believe it's not cumulative at all. It goes right to the heart of the question the jury's going to have to resolve of whether he was willfully lying when he presented that falsehood to them. And finally, Your Honor, we would like the opportunity to have the court review the alternative tapes that we have available. We believe it's very important for the jury to hear Detective Ferman's own words, and we believe that since Your Honor has determined that one of these taped excerpts is appropriate, that it should be a tape excerpt that is audible, in which his voice can be identified. Can we play the tape for Your Honor?
I recollect the tape, counsel.
Thank you.
Well, I think the argument's over at this point, counsel. Since this is a motion to reconsider, I don't believe that that particular issue is, well, simple enough. In making my original ruling regarding Miss McKinny and determining what should come in, the court's thought process was, I think, pretty obvious, that the issue was Detective Ferman's use of the racial epithet in a disparaging manner. And in reviewing the 41 offered incidents of that usage, the court wanted to find examples that would not then go on to include other offensive material as well, including physical abuse of other people, some other violent act, that sort of thing. So these were the most sanitized usage of the racial epithet the court could find. In reviewing this, the court listened to the tapes and then primarily worked from the transcripts in making the ruling. And Mr. Uelmen, I will concede that in selecting the excerpt to be played, I did not then go back and listen to the quality of the tape. So I will agree that that particular excerpt, the one where Detective Ferman discusses why black Muslims live in a particular part of town, that one is not audible in a real sense. And what the court had sought was an example of where Detective Ferman, in his own voice, makes a statement that is of such color and I'll use your term, Mr. Uelmen, flavor, that the person listening to that could understand and appreciate and evaluate whether or not that was a true statement of that person's true feelings, whether or not that statement, or whether or not that statement was role-playing in the context of the screenplay, and to allow the juror to give to that statement the appropriate weight. I will grant the motion to reconsider for this one particular item. I will substitute excerpt 27 for the excerpt regarding the black Muslims, which number I do not recollect. This is the police officer, female police officer, so we'll get to insult them as well, dealing with 6'5" suspects, so you can cue that up. All right, we'll take 10 minutes, have Ms. McKinney here. So present, Deputy Magnaro, let's have the jurors, please.
Judge, just so you know, when the jurors come in, Ms. Clark and I have entered into a stipulation simply as to what time the sun rose on June 13th of 1994.
Why don't we
It'll
take that up some other time?
Well, it takes 30 seconds, and I wanted to do it while
No,
it was still
counsel.
fresh in their minds from Mr. Rokar's testimony, Your Honor.
I'm sorry.
Your Honor,
Let's have the jurors, please.
If the clerk can give you, I want to introduce Mr. Kent Spaulding, Your Honor, if I might, to the jury.
I met Mr. Spaulding.
No, to the jury, because he's here for North Carolina, and so it relates to her.
Problem is, he is not admitted pro hoc vice. He is not on the record, counsel.
May I so move?
Need an application.
Well, I'm making an application now. I can make an oral application. He's been here for 2 weeks, Your Honor. He's paid his own
And
way.
I've been thrilled to have him here.
Yes.
If you want him on the record, you need to file the application. That's the court rule.
You know, he is actually leaving tomorrow, and he's here because of this particular witness. And
Oh, okay.
just, I want to just introduce him as, because he's been here, Your Honor, for 2 weeks.
Okay.
There's no problem, Your Honor. Is it?
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
How many times do I need to say okay? Nothing, just to say this is one of the attorneys representing Mr.
Let me ask these questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Regwan present as well. All right, Mr. Cochran, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense will next call Ms. Laura Hart McKinney to stand.
All right, before we do that, excuse me, just a minute,
Yes.
Ms. McKinney. Ladies and gentlemen, present here at council's table is Mr. Kent Spaulding. Mr. Spaulding, would you please stand? Mr. Spaulding is an attorney from, I believe, North Carolina, who's been assisting the defense, and that explains his presence here in court today. Thank you, Mr. Spaulding. Mr. Cochran. All right, Ms. McKinney, would you face the clerk, please?
Raise your right hand, please. You do solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in this testimony before this court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Please have a seat. State and spell your first and last names for the record.
My first name is Laura, L-A-U-R-A.
Why don't you pull the microphone closer, please?
First name Laura, L-A-U-R-A. Last name McKinney, M-C-K-I-N-N-Y.
Or is that a fresh glass, Mr. Cochran.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. McKinney.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cochran.
Ms. McKinney, what is your occupation?
I'm a filmmaker in residence at the North Carolina School of the Arts, School of Filmmaking, a professor of screenwriting.
And that is your present occupation?
Yes,
And you presently reside in North Carolina?
yes, I do.
And you're here today pursuant to a subpoena that was issued by this court?
Yes,
And how long have you been out here in California waiting to testify?
3 weeks and
Sustain.
All right. You're here to testify today from North Carolina?
yes, I am.
All right. Now, in that connection, prior to moving to North Carolina, did you live in California?
Yes, I did.
And how long had you lived in California prior to going to North Carolina?
Since I was 12.
So a good part of your life was spent
Yes.
here. Is that correct? When did you move to North Carolina?
In 1993.
All right. When you were last here in California, what was your occupation then?
I was a freelance writer, and I worked at UCLA as a senior learning skills counselor, and also at Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District as a home instructor.
And how long did you have those two occupations, both at UCLA and at the Malibu School District?
I started working for Malibu School District in 1974 or 1973, and for UCLA in 1983.
All right. Now, I would like to direct your attention back to the month of April of 1985. Did you have occasion during that month and during that year to meet an individual by the name of Mark Ferman?
I'm sorry, what was the month again,
I think
please?
April of 1985, or thereabouts.
It was February
All right.
1985,
Let's
yes.
specifically direct you back to February of 1985. And did you have occasion to meet Mark Ferman during that time frame?
Yes, I did.
And would you tell the jury where you were the time that you first met Mark Ferman? You might pull the microphone up a little bit closer to you.
All right. I was at a cafe in Westwood. I don't remember the name of the cafe, but I believe it was on Westwood Boulevard.
And what happened? How did you happen to meet Mr. Ferman at that time?
I was sitting on the outside of the cafe. There were tables on the outside, and I was sitting there. I was working on my laptop computer, and a man dressed in street clothes came up and asked me about my computer. That was a fairly common thing for people to do then, because this was a time when laptops weren't that familiar to people, and often people would come and ask me what it was and how you used it. So this man asked me what I was doing and what that was, and I explained to him that it was a laptop and explained to him how it worked. And
All right, and this was in February of 1985.
yes,
All right. Thereafter, during that conversation, did you have occasion to, were you working on some particular project at that time?
at the time
The time when you
When
first
I
met Detective Ferman?
I was transcribing some notes, and at the time I was thinking about developing a story about women in the police department and to what extent they were successful in different kinds of areas. I was thinking of particularly areas of high crime.
All right. Now, after you first met Mark Ferman in February of 1985, did you thereafter have further meetings with him after your initial meeting in February of 1985?
Yes, I did.
All right, and tell us about those meetings. And did you at some point engage him as a consultant or an advisor for a screenplay you were working on?
Yes,
All
I
right,
did.
tell us about that.
During our first meeting, Officer Ferman at that time told me he was an officer, and he was interested in my idea of working on a story about women on the police department and the extent to which they could succeed in areas of high crime. Officer Ferman had very strong views about the extent to which some women,
Right, next question.
Well, did Officer Ferman have views about the ability of women to succeed in high crime areas?
yes, he did.
What were his views in that regard? You may answer.
He had strong views about women's ability to be able to succeed in areas of high crime, feeling that some of them were not capable of that. And during this particular first meeting, he told me that he
Sustain.
So you
Next
had,
question.
certainly, you had a conversation during this first meeting. You were able to garner some of his views about women in law enforcement during the first meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Did you, at or during that first meeting, make some arrangements to meet further with Mr. Ferman regarding his views and whether or not he could help you with interviews that you might want to conduct?
Yes.
All right. Well, tell us about what you did in that connection. Did you retain him at some point?
I didn't retain him. I asked him if he would be interested in helping me give some ideas, some personal views that might help generate some thoughts about characters and police procedures and other areas that might be useful to me in helping understand the kinds of frustrations that men had on the police department and women and possibly some of the cover-ups that might occur in conjunction with that. And he agreed to help me in that, to that extent, and give me some of his personal views, some ideas that he might have. And so we agreed to meet again and tape the interviews.
All right, and you told him you wanted to tape the interviews that you conduct with him, did you?
Yes,
And did you tell him why you wanted to tape the interviews?
yes.
And why was that?
He was giving me a great deal of material that would be hard for me to process, to understand unless I listened to it, because I had to understand it sequentially to be able to write it cinematically. So sometimes it was police procedure, sometimes it was different kinds of things people were saying, and it would have been difficult to take copious notes and actually listen to him attentively.
All right, now, these interviews that you had with Detective Ferman, were all of those interviews taped, as best you can recall?
Yes.
And tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over what period of time did you conduct these taped interviews with Mark Ferman after your initial meeting with him in February of 1985?
Approximately from the beginning of April 2nd, I believe, through July 1994.
So over almost a 10-year period of time, you had taped interviews with this man, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with regard to these interviews, what did you call these interviews with Mr. Ferman?
Interviews with Mark Ferman.
And in talking with this man, what were you trying to get from him? Were you trying to get information from him?
I was trying to get some idea of the frustrations that some men who belong to a particular group called Men Against Women on the police department, some kind of frustrations that they might have that would cause them to want to join a group like that, and then try to understand.
She's answering the question.
Finish your answer.
Then try to understand as well some of the areas in which women might feel frustrated by being stonewalled and embarrassed and humiliated by men.
Now, in that connection, before you started taping these interviews, did Detective Ferman know that you were taping these interviews?
Yes.
And did you give him any, would you tell him, strike that, what did you tell him with regard to how you wanted him to talk? Did you want him to talk freely and openly to you and use words like police officers use, or what?
Sustain.
And what did you tell him about the kind of conversation or about the kinds of things you wanted him to share with you regarding police work?
Oh, well. You can answer the question.
I told him that I wanted to write a fictional piece based on fact, and so it was very important to me that I have a really clear idea of what some police officers would say in a given situation, so that the instances that he would give me would be as factual and realistic as possible.
You asked him to be factual and realistic, did you?
Yes.
Now, in that connection, after you would, before you'd have a meeting with Detective Ferman, would you ever provide him with any questions, the kinds of questions you would ask during your actual meeting?
Not for every meeting, but for our second meeting, the meeting after April 2nd, I compiled a list of questions based on some of his responses to that particular interview and sent them to him along with the interview so that he could refer back to some excerpts in the interview and then be prepared for some of the questions that we might want to talk about, anything that he might feel comfortable discussing in our next meeting. So I didn't always include questions.
But on occasion you did, is that correct?
Yes.
Let's talk about your procedure with regard to the taping of the interviews. After you had taped the interview and the interview had concluded, would you then do something with regard to transcribing those tapes?
Yes, I would take the tape back home and put it in my transcribing machine. I have a cassette transcriber, a professional cassette transcriber machine, and a micro cassette transcribing machine, which allows you to modulate the speed of speech and also the volume, and it has a foot pedal so that you can rewind at your leisure and review things that you're not sure about. So then I would put whatever cassette I was using in there and transcribe it within a day or two of the interview for my records.
Now, with regard to your transcribing habits, had you had a job prior to this time, prior to 1985, where you'd done transcribing before that?
Yes, I did.
What job did you have in that connection?
During college, I worked through, well, not through college, but through a large part of it for a few years at Retail Credit Company. It's a place, was in Van Nuys, and I was a professional transcriber.
So as a professional transcriber, you knew how to transcribe at the time you set about to transcribe these tapes, is that correct?
Yes,
And with regard to that, did you try to did you transcribe it accurately as best you could?
yes, I did.
And why did you want to transcribe it accurately? How would that be helpful to you?
Well, again, initially, I knew very little about the police department, and I was doing other extensive interviews and research, ride-alongs, lots of research at the Los Angeles Police Academy. But when someone was going to be telling me specific events or issues that I needed to understand clearly, I would need to take that down as accurately as possible so that when I refreshed my memory, the details that I would give would be accurate, so that when someone would read it or hopefully see it as a feature, they would know that it was an accurate, well-researched project. So it was very important for me to transcribe the interviews accurately.
Did you, at the outset in 1985, was there a difference in the way you transcribed in 85 and later on, let's say in 1988 or in 1994? Is there any difference?
Yes, there's a difference.
And tell us about that briefly.
Again, in the beginning, I wanted to be as precise as possible. Also, I was developing the story, but as the outline of the story became clear, and the treatment, which is a narrative short version of the story, as I understood what that was about, my questions to Officer Ferman at that time were sometimes more topical, so that when I would transcribe it, I might leave out my question, and I might just put in the topic. It also had something to do with the fact that I had just had 2 children during that period of time, from 1986 to the early 90s, and was married and I was very busy. So I didn't take as much time to transcribe my questions and all the finite kinds of details. If people interrupted us in the restaurant, I would keep that out.
Right. Did you ever at any time in transcribing these transcripts ever substitute a word or put a word in that Mr. Ferman didn't say?
Not intentionally, no.
You tried to be accurate, is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask if I can approach the witness, and this has previously been marked another hearing 1364. I want to just ask her a couple of questions regarding it. I want to place before you Defendant's 1364, which I believe it indicates Ferman questions round 2. Would you tell the jury just briefly what that is, Ms. McKinney?
This is an example of the questions that I gave Officer Ferman after our first interview on April 2nd, 1985. This is what I sent to him in conjunction with the tape transcript of that first interview.
All right, now, with regard to this, you told us about the interviews with Mark Ferman. You've also told us that you're working, as a result of those interviews, on a screenplay called Men Against Women. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And was a subplot of your screenplay, Men Against Women, dealing with racism at all?
No, it was sexism.
You were dealing with sexism, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, now, with regard to the taped interviews, over the 10-year period that we've been talking about, do you remember how many tapes you actually transcribed over that period of time?
Again, please, how many tapes
How
I
many tapes were actually
transcribed?
transcribed over the 10-year period? How many hours?
Oh, 11 to 12 hours of tape.
All right. And I presume during these 11 to 12 hours you tried to be as accurate as possible, right?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the 11 to 12 hours, did you ever at any point inadvertently tape over any of the tapes?
Yes, I did.
All right, would you tell us how many, if you recall?
I taped inadvertently over 2 tapes.
And would one of those be the first tape?
Yes, one
And
was the first.
When was that? When was that first interview?
The first interview that was taped was April 2nd, 1985.
Now, in April 2nd, 1985, would I be correct that after the interview was conducted with Detective Ferman, you then transcribed it within a day or so?
Yes, that's correct.
And in seeking to transcribe it, was your memory fresh at the time you transcribed it?
Yes,
Did you personally transcribe it and seek to record everything he had said?
yes,
And were the resulting transcripts or transcript a true account of what Mr. Ferman had said during that interview? Oh,
yes,
and finally, was this transcript an accurate record of what was on the tape?
yes,
All right. Now, was there another time that there was another tape that was inadvertently taped over later on?
yes.
And do you remember the number of that one, do you recall?
I believe that was tape number 9.
Was that a later time?
Yes,
All right. But with regard to tape number 9, if I were to ask you the same questions, did you seek to transcribe that tape within a day or so after the interview?
yes,
And did you at that time personally do that?
yes,
Did you strive to be as accurate as you could?
yes,
And was it a true account of what Mr. Ferman had said?
yes,
And it was an accurate record as far as you knew. Is that right?
yes.
All right. Now, the last interview you had with this man was July 28th, 1994? Is that right?
Yes.
Where did that interview take place?
That interview took place in Alice's restaurant in Westwood.
Now, during the time that you talked with Mr. Ferman, during this 10-year period of time, did he ever use the racial epithet, which I'll call the N-word, during the course of your conversations with him?
Yes, he did.
And in the course of your preparation of your testimony here today, can you tell the jury how many times you've counted that he used that word?
Approximately 42.
42 times?
Yes.
And when he would use this word in the court, strike that. In what circumstances would he use this word in being interviewed and talking to you?
Objection. 52.
Oh.
Well, the tapes were, the interviews were confidential. I mean, Officer Ferman certainly didn't think that
Objection.
I would.
All right, this answer is non-responsive.
Let
Would
me-
you
let me-
rephrase the
Let me raise the
question?
question. Can you describe for the jury under what circumstances would he use this so-called N-word? What was he talking about? Police procedures? What was he talking about?
Oh, I see. That the word would come up in conversation when he might be talking about how an officer might deal with a suspect, or a police procedural issue, or how an officer might be talking about someone in administration, just general, normal language.
Next question.
All right. And when you would hear these words or this particular epithet, would that have an effect upon you?
Objection. No.
Certainly.
And what effect did it have upon you?
Oh,
You may answer.
It's a base epithet. There's no way of doctoring it up and making it sound better. It's offensive, and I didn't feel good about it hearing it. However, I was in very much of a journalistic mode and knew to be able to get the information that I needed to be able to acquire from Officer Ferman, I would need to not react, not to be judgmental about hearing some of the very base, offensive kinds of things that I would be hearing.
next question.
All right. So you didn't agree with this use of these words. Is that what you're saying to us?
No, I didn't agree with the use of them.
All right. But you were in a journalistic mode, so you sat there and listened to him as he went on. Is that right?
Sustained. Well,
Did you say anything to him about using these words at that time?
No, I did not.
And in the use of these words and other things during he was talking to you, would he describe his experiences in police work? May I answer?
Could you ask the question again,
Certainly.
please? Sorry.
In the use of these words and during the course of the interview, did Detective Ferman describe his experiences in being a police officer?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the 41 or 42 times that he used the so-called N-word, can you describe for the jury how he appeared as he used this word? You may answer.
You
have
can
a
answer.
question?
Could you ask it again?
Certainly. I understand that
I
was,
understand,
yes.
but
All
I
right.
think...
During the 41 or 42 times that Mr. Ferman used the word nigger, could you tell us how he appeared as he did that?
Objection, no foundation.
You may answer.
When Officer Ferman used the word nigger, it was in a very casual, ordinary pattern of speech. It was nothing extraordinary. It was just conversation.
And as he did that, did you have a sense of how he was using it?
Objection.
Vague.
Let me see. Did he appear to be joking when he was using that word?
Rephrase the question.
Well, when he used the word, was it-
ask her to describe the demeanor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very kindly. Would you describe the demeanor of Detective Ferman or Mr. Ferman while he was using this word these 41 or 42 times?
Objection,
You may answer.
He was using it in a serious fashion. It was a word that apparently he felt...
Sustain.
All right. You may answer the question, but let me ask again, Your Honor. Can you describe, and I want you to paint a word picture for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, of how he appeared when he was using this word these 41 or 42 times that you recall? Your best description.
no foundation.
You may answer.
When Officer Ferman used this word, it was in conjunction to many of the things we would be discussing, and it was in a serious manner. It was not lighthearted. It was something that he would use in normal conversation.
All right. When he used this word, did he appear to you to be was it using it in a way that was insulting? You may answer that question. Was it insulting?
Wasn't
Go ahead.
was insulting to me. The word is insulting, and when he was using it in a demeaning, derogatory fashion. I don't know that he would think it was insulting, but I don't know
Sustain.
that.
You've answered the question.
All right. You've answered the question. Did he use it in a disparaging manner? You may answer that.
Yes, it's a disparaging word. He was using it in a disparaging fashion.
In the course of the time that you came to interview this man over 10 years, did you ever form an opinion of whether or not he was a racist?
Sustain.
Or did he use this word in a racist manner?
Sustain.
Did he use this word in a vicious manner?
I think negative, disparaging, insulting, I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor.